Sandra. Thank you so much for joining me on today's podcast. I'm Antonia Keane Moore, and we're going to have a nice, lengthy discussion actually going right back to the evolution of marketing, which I'm really looking forward to because I myself, as a self-employed small business, obviously everything these days is all about marketing, particularly online and social media. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your take on marketing and, I suppose even branding as well. So you, Sandra, you're a professor at GIBS in South Africa, previously IMD, and Imperial College UK. So do you want to kind of give us a background on, I suppose yourself and how you got into the profession that you're actually in, and then we can dive into marketing.
Okay, well, I've been in this profession, I have to admit, for 50 years, which is quite a long time. And I started when I was very young, 2 years old. I always tell everybody, but the truth of it is that I turned 75 this year. So I have been through all the various developments that marketing has gone through, all the way from the late 60s, where I was in my own business, and then I was in the family business, and then did an MBA and a doctorate, and decided I wanted to actually get into the academic stream, but work very closely all over the world with corporations, looking at best and next practice. I was with IMD in Switzerland for many years, and at Imperial College in London for many years, and then came back to South Africa. So I'm based in Cape Town, but of course I work globally, and my interest is global. And my work and my writing and my latest book, The Distinguishers, is about global corporations, particularly looking for universal principles, because I think that's what's important, to see what is happening in the world that is universal, where we can see trends happening irrespective of the country or the culture that we're dealing with. Obviously, there are differences from country to country and culture to culture, but basically looking for the broad universal trends so that people, particularly new entrepreneurs coming in, can really understand what is happening. And of course, most brands today will want to go global, even though there is a trend towards localization, and we can talk about that. But that's basically my work. A lot of what I've learned from corporations, working with them, writing about them, which requires a lot of discipline, looking at next and best practice, and always wanting to project what is about to happen or happening as we speak, rather than talking about the past and trying to replicate what has happened in the past. And I think that that really is a good starting point for our discussion, because I think a lot of the disruption that is taking place in business and with brands, due to the advanced technologies, we can't ignore that technology is having a very dramatic effect very quickly and exponentially on what brands are able to offer and how they interact with their clients. But most of the disruption is about doing what you're currently doing better. Whereas in my work, I'm looking to see what brands are doing that is different, and therefore making new markets and taking these markets at scale globally.
Okay, yeah, wow. So I suppose, as you were saying, like there's kind of a trend in, marketing locally, and then at the same time too, like there is sort of like the push to market globally. I guess, like, why would somebody decide to go local or go global? I mean, I probably assume it might be to do with like whatever product or service they might be selling, but yeah. I guess, what would you kind of say would be, the benefit of either?
Okay, well, they're not either or. You see, what we can't do is ask questions or try to answer questions about fixing or tweaking the old model. This is a new model emerging. So let me give you an example. We know, and COVID accelerated this, that people, when I say people, in the main, one of the trends seems to be buying local, particularly in food and other things. However, this trend to go local, and I'm acknowledging that COVID has accelerated that. We can see in all sorts of industries. For example, in storage, let me try and explain this. So you have a company, it's fascinating really, you have a company in the US who, acknowledging this trend to go global and building a platform, being really the key to growing new markets, has developed an app whereby they can pinpoint what idle storage there is in a local area. Somebody's got an attic, somebody's got a garage, somebody's got a cupboard that is empty. And they can also find people who want storage in an area. And what they have developed as their unique proposition, their IP, is really the matching of these people in local areas that have storage with those people who want storage. Now, whereas that looks pretty bland on the surface, it could be a huge displacement for the traditional storage companies. It starts off as a dot, as many of these new things do, but then become a phenomenon. So this move to local, about finding out who's got local storage and who needs local storage. It's cheaper, it's easier to get to if you want to go and get something that's been stored. You don't have to deal with a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy, and many of the storage companies are out of town, so it's very far away. All of this has led to a very interesting company that is scaling at the moment, and it happens to be scaling in the US. It could have been anywhere. However, once they've got that right, what they're going to inevitably do, which is one of the trends that we see worldwide, is they're going to globalize that concept. So the fact is that these two things are not necessarily mutually exclusive. The move to global is looking globally and around in neighborhoods at what can be done. We see that with companies like TaskRabbit, for example. Now, TaskRabbit is about matching freelance people who have got spare time and skills with people in the area that want it. So that instead of companies having these huge maintenance fixed costs, if you need something done, whether it's assembling a table you've bought from IKEA, or fixing a roof that's leaking, or needing help with a piece of software, they will tell you, and that is their unique IP, who in your area has a skill and is free, and they will match those two things together. So it's a concept that emanates from a movement to go more local, but that concept can be globalized very easily. So these two things are not separate. The other thing that's happening locally, as we know, is in the food industry, where food manufacturers are starting to go direct to customers now, and where manufacturing of food is taking place closer to customer to obviate the huge amount of congestion, miles, loss of nutrition that is happening when food is grown so far away from where people live. So urban farming is huge. But what I'm saying to you is, if a concept develops, let's say farming in a supermarket's parking lot, which is literally what's happening in Germany, and it spreads. So it spreads pan-European and then becomes a global concept. And the question is, how do you take a local concept and globalize that local concept in different countries? How do you do that? Do you franchise that? Do you do it yourself, et cetera, et cetera? So that's my, it's not about local versus global. It's about the fact that people are buying more locally. They are, particularly in some areas, supporting local. And there's a lot of effort by governments and special associations to get people to buy local for many reasons, including environmental reasons. But very clever concepts that are based on this can be globalized.
Okay, yeah. And I suppose, like, why are distinguishers, making and taking over new markets then? Obviously you have like the local markets, that are producing foods, and then you have people like taking over new markets particularly. And so why would companies want to dominate and take over new markets?
Well, why wouldn't they create new markets? Look, you have the mature, what the distinguishers is a term that the co-author and I in our new book, Distinguishers, developed, because we wanted to distinguish between disruptors who are simply using technology to continue to do what they've done in the past. They're using digitalizing, in other words, their processes, or digitalizing their products, but they're basically doing what they've always done. And distinguishers that are actually creating new markets and scaling these markets very quickly, globally, and at lower cost. And we believe that this is very sustainable for the future. Now, what is different, before I get on to the specifics of this, is that whereas in the past, these were the big companies with the big resources that could do anything, including globalize, today you have more and more entrepreneurs who are starting out as, very small, but able to globalize and scale at very low cost because of the technology. And it's much easier today for an entrepreneur to get the funding that is necessary, and to use cloud and various other resources like Shopify, for example, where you can become an online retailer very easily without any capital or infrastructure, because you just join their platform. So it's much easier today for an entrepreneur to become big and to become global and to build a new business from a new idea. This wasn't possible 15 or even 10 years ago because there was nowhere to go. Today, governments are encouraging this and incentivizing this. Banks are much more open to this. They've understood that this is a big opportunity that they've missed out on. Everybody knows it's good for their economies, et cetera, et cetera. So it's easy today for an outsider, an entrepreneur, to come in and become a distinguisher and to displace large scale brands and industries. We see this happening in finance all the time, but not only. And this is the big difference. Whereas before you couldn't really have access. The barrier to entry was too high. You needed capital, you couldn't get it. You needed infrastructure, you couldn't afford it. Nobody would listen to you. Today, that whole landscape has changed. And this is what the big brands are beginning to understand, that they could be displaced by people they didn't really take seriously at the beginning. We see this with SodaStream and Pepsi. Pepsi's just has taken over SodaStream. SodaStream is a distinguisher in as much as they are changing customers' behavior by getting them not to buy water. And sparkling water has overtaken still water today, and all of the water category has taken over the fizzy drinks, sweet drinks. But SodaStream basically changed consumer behavior. What they're saying is, because we want to be more environmental, we don't want you to buy in plastic bottles or in or cans. These are not being recycled. There are millions and billions of these cans and bottles not being recycled at the moment. We want you to make your fizzy drinks at home. This is a massive change in behavior, and it's not just another product. It has massively displaced the traditional manufacturing and distribution of fizzy drinks. That's why Pepsi has taken them over. So many of these new distinguishers that are basically displacing the old concepts, the old brands, the old assets are being bought over, as you saw Salesforce bought Slack. And it's one of the things you can do if you are mature and traditional, and you see that these new brands are in fact building scale very quickly, particularly with younger markets, which they are. One of the things that is happening is that they're buying them up rather than doing them within their own corporations for reasons we all understand, because that transformation is just too difficult.
Yeah, and I suppose, I'm aware obviously that you're just using like SodaStream as an example, but I suppose as well, like with that, like particularly, I would kind of say that I would probably buy, bottled water over do my own SodaStream or making my own fizzy drinks, like just because the fact that tap water is full of chemicals and fluoride and everything else, like, so unless you have like a reverse osmosis system, I probably would always get bottled water and probably use like, or buy the fizzy drink out of the can or the bottle. But yeah, I mean, I'm always big into recycling. I've been so since I was a kid, even though like my family weren't. It just was something that was always very environmentally conscious. It is a shame that so many different companies are still producing plastic, and things that people are not aware of how to recycle or or they just don't really care anymore in this day and age. And I suppose, like, do you see any sort of like examples of really good marketing from companies that does encourage people to recycle?
Well, it's not just about recycling. It's about the whole. Distinguishers are people who change behavior. Now, whether you're one of them or not, I don't know. Whether I happen to be making fizzy water at home, but I wasn't an early adopter for Uber. That didn't mean that Uber wasn't a good idea. So we have to be careful about projecting ourselves into it. But the fact is that SodaStream is doing brilliantly, and was a startup in Israel and now is global. But I think that when we talk about distinguishers, they do change behavior at scale, and they know how to do this. The second thing that they do is they redefine who the customer is. And this speaks to your point, because the customer is no longer just the end user. The customer are people, and that includes communities and citizens, places, that's cities and countries, and the planet. And if your value proposition does not have that embedded in its purpose, you actually cannot distinguish your brand, and you won't be creating, in today's markets, you will not be creating new markets and scaling those markets. And all of those that we have studied, and we looked at over 100, by the way, in our book, they all have either people and or places and or planet embedded. Let me give you a South African example. SodaStream is a brilliant example, but we have a company here called Discovery, and they have globalized, and very quickly. And one of the companies is Discovery Insure, which is the car insurance part of this whole Discovery group, which is basically financial services, investments, health, insurance, etc. Discovery Insure said, we're not just going to sell car insurance like everybody else. What we're going to do is, and this is part of what this distinguisher does, although we've been talking about it for years, we're going to do this because it will create a better outcome for customer, which I call a desired customer outcome, I call market space. So they define their market space as great, safe driving, and everything that they do, quite literally, all the time, money and energy, and the money spent on technology, by the way, is to make their customers better drivers, and they reward them accordingly, of course. And embedded in their purpose is that they want to change driving behavior, because South Africa has one of the worst accident rates in the world. This just happens to be the case. They're doing the same in banking now, where they want you to actually be better bankers, healthier spenders. Now, NatWest is doing the same in the UK, and actually the co-author that wrote Distinguishers with me is the CMO at NatWest, and he lives in Dublin. I have a history in Dublin, by the way, because my grandparents were Irish and lived in Dublin, but be that as it may. And NatWest is doing the same thing. They realized during COVID that there was a very small window twixt having enough and not having enough, because people weren't basically saving enough, and that didn't matter whether they were, what income bracket they fell into. People are either savers or not savers. And what they're doing at the moment is, amongst other things, is trying to get people to save more, fundamentally change behavior, and their strategy is, and everything that they're doing is about that. And it's quite fascinating, because instead of doing the traditional things that a brand would do in financial services, for example, give high interest rates to high depositors and low interest rates to low depositors, they're giving high interest rates to people who save in bits and pieces, but often in order to encourage them to save more. And of course, that's how they're scaling this new changed behavior.
Okay, yeah, very good. And I suppose, like, what can you see? I mean, where do you see, I suppose, like marketing right now, and where do you see it kind of going in the next 5 years?
Well, can I just spend a bit of time talking a little bit about where it's come from and where it's
Yeah,
going?
absolutely.
I think it's actually quite fascinating because I prepared this for this podcast, and it actually helps people understand why we're talking about a different model when we look back. I'll try and do this as quickly as I can, but we start off in the 60s where we're talking about the product era, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience also during this, to show you how marketing has developed. But if you're interested, and your listeners are, how it's influenced people like me who've been in this subject and progressing this subject. So it started off with products, and it was really about the features to mass people. And Coca-Cola, was the quintessential. Everybody wanted a Coke. You market it to everybody. It's Ford. It's Coke. We're one product brand, and we appeal to everyone. And when I did an MBA in '82, the most interesting thing that happened to me was when the marketing professor walked in, and he talked about the 4 Ps. And I nearly fell off my seat. I couldn't believe that, having been in the family business, nobody had ever told me that there were 4 Ps, and it was the most exciting thing I'd ever heard. It was 1972. But it was the marketing era from, the 70s to the 80s, where people were saying, you have to have benefits to certain segments. Not everybody's the same. You have to have segmentation. You have to, of course, segmentation has radically changed today, and we can talk about that. But you have to have different benefits and different brands for different segments. And if you were Levi's, the great case study that was run in '72 by the professor was, and that's changed dramatically. If you're Levi's and you're in jeans, you cannot go into suits. Well, we know that that's changed very dramatically today. If you're Amazon, you can start in books and you can go anywhere. And if you're Spotify and you're in music, you can easily go into podcasts and news and anything else, because you are in that space, that listening space, and there's no end to where you can stretch a brand, and that's very different. So then we moved, and I moved to Switzerland then in the '80s, and the professor that I worked for, the dean that I worked for, said, computers were very important then, as you know, and we knew and began to understand that computers in and of themselves meant nothing. It was about the software, because they were just dumb. And what was software? Was it a product? Was it a service? And there was a lot of debate about this. And what we understood is, if you sold a company a bearing, or you sold a company a computer, it wasn't the price of the bearing or the computer that mattered. Because if that actually went down because they were badly installed, or people were badly trained, or when it broke down, there were no spare parts, it cost much more than the actual product itself. So we began to look at value-add services, and I began to work in value-add services, and I wrote a paper called Manufacturers Step Up for Services, because the point was that it wasn't just, traditional service companies that were now in services and had to actually gear up and build capability for services. It was also the manufacturers. So the whole hype here was about product plus. It's not just the products, it's the services that surround the products. And a lot of the investment went into services. And that then was actually working with IBM. And IBM was the big move into services, which happened in Europe, actually, didn't happen in America. And of course, today, IBM, and not today, for a long time, IBM hasn't made any product. It's all about cognitive computing and Watson, and knowing more about cancer and financial decisions than anyone else. So it was this move away from the actual product to what actually produced the results. And that pushed us very much into the next era, which was around, in the 90s and mid 90s. And by then I'd moved to London, and we started talking about relationship management. This had become very important. You needed to get closer to your customers. You needed to know them. Now, there were some people who interpreted this as, take them out to dinner, or give them and their families a holiday and get to know them on the golf course, and then they'll support you, which of course it was not. It was really about understanding what customers went through in order to get the results that they wanted. And that led us into the experience, marketing becoming about customer experience. And the great case study there was Amazon, because Amazon demonstrated very dramatically that there was a new model, and it was about experience. It wasn't just about the thing, it was about how you received the thing, what you went through to get it, whether someone could recommend to you what was best for you. And I wrote a case study and wrote it in my book called Customer Capitalism on Amazon, and my publisher threw it out. He said, no, this Amazon is not going to make money, and he's losing money, he can't pay his bills. And he actually threw it out. And after 9 months, when the book was in process, because then it took 9 months to publish a book, he asked me to put it back in, because by then we could see that, and he could see that Amazon was actually a new model, and this was going to be the new normal. Now, Amazon, of course, was about the internet, but it wasn't about just the internet. It was about the fact that you didn't make your money up front, as we saw in the pharmaceutical industry or most other manufacturers. You didn't make your money up front, and then the competition would come in, and your margins would diminish, and then you would create more features and better features to it. It was much more about the experience, about the journey customers went through, and the fact that you were relating to them throughout this journey. And we went through this experience, what we call the experience economy. I created the idea of market space then, which was to rather look at the space you wanted to occupy and own, and be better at than anyone else rather than the product. So instead of selling bearing, you were selling trouble-free operations. Instead of selling cement, you were selling lifetime home ownership. And this opened up space for brands to get much more into their core business, because we began to understand already then that people like Kodak were losing out because they had defined their business too narrowly as cameras, as we all know, instead of looking at the real competition that was coming from outside their industry. So it was about partnering and about offering more services and about understanding the experience that customers went through. And then to move on quickly, and I have to just say here in brackets that some people still think that experience and journey is the same thing, and it's not. Journey is about what customers go through to buy a product like a car. Experience is about what customers go through to get an outcome. So if you're buying a pill, that's a journey to get the pill. And you may have pain points there, and most traditional brands will try and eliminate the pain points associated with you buying that car or that pill or that tractor or whatever it happens to be. Whereas experience is about getting the outcome, and it's from the time the customer decides what they want all the way through to when the customer is reviewing and renewing. And that opened up space both for partnering and for getting much more of the customer's wallet. And that was the big breakthrough. As we know, once Amazon had developed the trust with customers and had got to know customers and understand customers and start to build customer insights, they were able to go into much more. And of course, that led us into the 2000s, where we began to see that platforms were becoming more and more important, and that the real IP was knowing what people wanted at any moment in time and matching that with who had what at any moment in time. And that was the big Uber aha moment. And I like to use Uber as an example, because I think Uber was the first person to demonstrate that there was a different model afoot, and the real IP was knowing who has what at any moment in time and who wants what at any moment in time. Now, obviously, that is a very different model from the traditional linear model, where somebody makes something, it goes through a linear channel down into some customer that they don't know or particularly care about. And I call this the new middle. So someone, it's not about what, Mercedes or Audi or Honda knowing more and more about their customer. It's about an Uber coming along and saying, actually, the outcome is not better car buying. The outcome is mobility, and you may need less cars, or you may not need a second car, and you may not need a garage. And by the way, it's okay to go to the airport by Uber, because we won't let you down. And many of us who were not early adopters began to use Uber more and more. And, the rest is pretty much history. But what is more, we started talking about disruption then, and how technology was disrupting brands, and many of the more mature brand industries were scrambling to spend more money on technology to digitalize what they were previously doing. But we then move into what I call the distinguisher era, and that's sort of 2015 plus. I try to put a timeline on this. And lots, it's difficult to separate these two eras, but lots happening here, which was different, which I just like to talk to very quickly. First of all, it's about displacement. And what I've said is that distinguishers do change behavior. That's not particularly new, but they change behavior at scale. They do this because customers want a better, they truly believe, and they believe in their role in getting customers to have a better outcome. Customers defined as people, places, and planet. And without that, it's a no-go. You don't have a strategy. Lots of social impact built into that. They also use the technology differently, because distinguishers don't necessarily use the technology to do what's been done before. So you take an IKEA as an example. IKEA is not using the technology, the advanced three-dimensional technology today, virtual technology, to build more stores. They have already, 200 stores, I think, worldwide. What they're doing is enabling you and me to use the virtual technology to be able to see what a room would look like with a piece of furniture, in what color, in what fabric, so we can make better choices. And we can do that while we're on our bicycle exercising. So, it's about the anywhere, everywhere customer, the rise of the smartphone universally in helping customers to research almost anything from anywhere and make better decisions. And whereas IKEA was quintessentially the company that got customers to come in, walk around their big warehouses, do their own choosing, push their trolleys to the cashier, then take it to the car, then take it home and assemble it. Now they're saying, actually, you can buy it from anywhere. You can make better decisions because we're providing you with a technology that enables you to visualize your home in different ways. And we will use freelance people, and actually they bought TaskRabbit to do this, that will then deliver for you and assemble for you. So they changed their whole model. They use technology to change the model rather than to just digitalize their stores. And this is what the distinguisher does. The distinguisher also is able to displace existing assets, which is really fascinating, because it's not about banking, worrying about what the bank across the road is doing and doing it better. It's not even about what the fintechs are doing, although it is to some extent, because the fintechs are doing it infinitely better. It's more about how some distinguishers are finding different types of assets that have never been found before. So let me give you an example from Africa. It's fascinating. It's called livestock wealth. And what this guy is saying is there's 100 million cows in Africa. And there are many farmers who can't get funded because they've been underserved, or they have not been part of the banking system. And what we can do with these 100 million cows is we can offer them to investors so that they can buy either a cow or part of a cow. And by the way, the investors come from all over the world. And instead of investing in the stock exchange, they invest in a cow, thereby releasing the asset and enabling the farmers, of course, to develop their farm. And this speaks as well to food shortage. So they're very good at seeing new assets or understanding that the underserved might want to buy fractionally, and fractional buying and fractional share selling, fractional housing, fractional farming, all of this. There are a lot of new brands that have developed around this. The other thing that Displaces are very good at is they are very good at not just making and moving stuff, which is what most traditional brands do well, but actually finding, identifying waste and packaging that waste into a brand. Let me give you an example. In the UK, there's a company called Cohelo. What Cohelo does is not make or move machines for hospitals. They actually are good at finding the idle machine availability and matching that to hospitals or people who need that machine at any moment in time. Now, if you look at Uber or you look at Airbnb, all of these distinguishers, and these are, we all know these brands well, all of these distinguishers are speaking to spare capacity somewhere, and they're not making and moving anything. They're totally agnostic. They're matching people who have got something and where there's waste, and matching that to people who actually need that at any moment in time. So this displacement that distinguishers do, and this is the big new trend that we're seeing in marketing, the displacing of old and stale brands. They displace processes as well. We have a brand in South Africa called PayFast, and what they're basically doing, and they're scaling as a consequence, is saying when you have to pay someone, you don't have to go through the process of making them a beneficiary and then paying them, which is a very laborious, time-consuming process. You just go straight onto our app and you just pay them directly. So what I'm trying to say, and I'm trying to give examples to demonstrate, is that the new brand is a displacer. It often starts off as a dot and becomes a phenomenon. It's often unnoticed by the more traditional kinds of companies who are mature and large, and they actually use a different economic model, because the one thing we've understood about marketing is that customers will no longer pay for baggage that doesn't add value, that they see, sense, acknowledge, and are prepared to pay for. And that's why some of the new brands that are digital are not just doing things quicker and better, but are doing it at lower and lower cost, and are able to scale at lower and lower cost. And in addition to using a new economic part of the new economic is that they're using data. Data grows as you use it. It's not a finite resource. You don't have to build a new factory if you want to take an idea from America or Ireland into Africa or into India or into Europe at very low cost and at great speed. You can actually go into a different country. You can adapt your product very quickly, and you can do it at lower and lower cost. So we have a company here called Aerobotics in South Africa, who's now in 17 countries, was selling sensors and drones, then defined their market space as agricultural crop productivity, and is using AI and all the advanced technology to get smarter. And if you're using data and learning to get smarter, as you're getting smarter, it's costing you less and less. And as it's costing you less and less to get bigger, so your marginal cost gets lower, and it's a completely different economic model from traditional brands, which makes it very difficult for the traditional brands to catch up. I think that I hope I've given you, I mean, there's much more to it, like open source, which I haven't discussed. And another important thing, which is anything as a service, which is the move away from ownership to usership. And the fact that customers more and more, B2B and B2C, by the way, want not just to own things, but to actually have access to them. So if you are a hospital or a hotel and you want a climate change or a climate management system, the brand Tran Technologies will give you that as a service, climate as a service. You don't buy the product, you don't buy the infrastructure. Now, the implication of that is enormous, because whether it's a climate control system or whether it's a washing machine, the more people are paying just for use rather than the actual product itself, the more the brand and the supplier are responsible for A, getting them to make the right decisions, B, maintaining it and keeping it running, C, doing replacements when it is necessary, and keeping it going for longer, because they don't want people to throw it away as we did in the old days with conspicuous consumption, because then they would buy something else. What they want them to do is to keep it for as long as possible, because they've got to replace it and it's on their balance sheet. And this also speaks, of course, to using less material and being more environmental. So there are a lot of things happening, and I can't obviously, go through them all, but the real point I wanted to make is that there has been a progression, and we're now into an era where the technology enables brands to do things quicker, to change behavior at scale, to use a viral model rather than the old model, which was more about word of mouth, which is a slow burn. And today we know that between 50 and 90% of the time when a consumer makes a decision, and it could be a new car or what hotel to go to, or what surgeon to choose, they will go to the internet and look for reviews. Now that's huge for marketing, because it means that we have to reconsider the role of the salesperson. We can't buy credibility, we have to earn credibility. And it's the viral model rather than the old-fashioned market share model is, I suppose, one of the most disruptive things that is happening in marketing today. Now, this is not just about social media. This is about every single customer experience having to be managed in such a way that it is positive, because if it isn't positive, you're not going to get that positive review. And if you're not going to get that positive review, customers are simply not going to be prepared to support the brand.
Yeah, I would agree. Well, I suppose, I mean, yes, word of mouth is a bit of a slow burner, but a lot of businesses still to this day do actually rely on word of mouth. And I suppose if you could nearly even say that, like, reviews and that is a form of word of mouth. Yeah, virality is definitely something that, is great for business, but it's very hard to actually, intentionally and deliberately create a viral video, because you could create a video thinking this is going to be it. If you're ticking all the boxes and get all the bells and whistles, and then it doesn't actually go viral at the end. I think it's something that just you have to do on a whim, and it's just really down to potluck or, hopping on trends and things as well. So I suppose that was really interesting, kind of going right back to the beginning and kind of bringing it up to date. So I guess just to kind of maybe round off the interview, what would you say for, any business that's either a small business starting out or a business looking to scale, or a bigger business? What would you say? And you kind of did that a little bit already, but just kind of 3 maybe top tips to kind of focus on to market any business in today's environment.
Okay. The first thing that I would say is that don't copy what is being done and try to do it better. That's not what wins markets today. It's doing different things that is really creating the new markets. It's not about tweaking and whether you're an entrepreneur or startup or whether you are in an existing business, if you're trying to grow and scale your markets, don't try and tweak the old model. The old model doesn't work anymore. You have to use another model. Now, how to do that and how to do that in an existing organization is, of course, a whole discussion all on its own. But I think that that's the first thing. Understand, and particularly if you're dealing with younger markets like, the new generations and the millennials, understand that you need to move away from old forms of segmentation. And, I always give the example of the doorman at the hotel and I wearing the same sort of Nike shoes, even though we don't fall into the same demographic or even psychographic. No traditional forms of segmentation would put us together. But we both are jogging fanatics, so we both spend money on good jogging shoes. I also use the example, of people that you would never put into the same market segment. It didn't matter how much money you spent, but watch the same Netflix movies. They have the same taste. They're not the same necessarily age or education level or income level, but they are affinity groups. So, don't rely on old forms of segmentation. Think about movements rather than markets. Markets are an old concept based on product categories, baked beans, cars, courses. Coursera is a very good example of, someone, a distinguisher who has gone against the silo approach where you go to one university or one course and is saying, actually, you can pick and choose wherever you like and choose whatever's good for you, which is, about micro-satisfying for that individual, but not forcing them into a silo. So that's a very good example of a movement, the anti-silo movement, rather than a market where you would be looking at a product category. So move away from markets to movements. I think work differently. I think the old model of fixed costs where you have to, where you expect customers to pay for all the things that they don't actually get value out of is just, is just gone. And you just can't continue to expect them to pay for anything that they don't see as value. And that's very much part of why the new startups are taking and making these markets, because they're not carrying the cost and they're using the crowd much more. And even for the delivery of services, use the crowd. You don't necessarily have to build fixed costs which made you stronger in the past, but now might make you weaker. Particularly, if your decision-making is slowed down. So work differently, work lean, don't accumulate costs where it's not necessary, but don't compromise on the experience that customers go to get that outcome, and reward them on that outcome, whether it's great safe driving or better banking or whatever that outcome is that you've defined. Reward them because customers want to be rewarded. And I don't mean for buying stuff, I mean for accomplishing stuff, for getting fitter, for example, which is the whole Fitbit story. So, I think that the customers want to know who you are and what you stand for, and you need to be able to communicate that to them. And I think my final word of advice, and this comes, after years and years and years of working and writing and trying to understand what it's all about is truth telling. I think today, because we rely so much, customers rely so much on reviews, and the actual brands that are building businesses like Trustpilot around reviews, collecting reviews, you have to deliver the promise. It's no good having a fancy promise. It's no good having a fancy advertising campaign. You have to deliver on the promise. You have to tell it as it is, and you have to be transparent. People want to, they want traceability, they want transparency, they want to know what their data is being used for. Integrity and truth telling is at the heart of this. And I think that if brands understand that they can't buy that, they have to earn that because they are delivering the promise. I think that, you know, that is probably the best advice that I can give.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's some solid advice for sure, to reward your customers, because I mean, that is really all kind of like on the basis of building that network, building that relationship, building that know, like, and trust factor. And again, kind of like bringing it all back to having that community as well. So I think that's really, really good advice. And of course, then to kind of try and, you know, rather than tweaking the old model, try and create a new model and keep moving forward and trying to think out of the box. There, I mean, all different ways for sure that I think any new business in this day and age needs to apply and consider. So listen, Sandra, thank you so much for joining me in the podcast today. That was a wealth of information for anybody listening, I'm 100% sure. So listen, thank you so much once again. And if you have anything else that you want to add, do let me know. Or if you've got anything else in the future as well, get back in touch. I'd love to have you back on. So do you want to tell our listeners where they can find you and where they can buy the book?
Okay, thank you for that. My latest book is called Distinguishers, Winning Customers at Speed, Scale, and Lower Cost. And well, you can get it either in digital format or in paperback, hard copy from Amazon. It's not expensive, and I would love to hear from you and hear what you think about it. I can, you know, I'm on LinkedIn, and you can get me there, or my email address is prof.sandra.vandermerwe, or one word, @gmail.com. Love to hear what you feel about the ideas. Love to hear what you think about the book, and keep scaling, keep marketing, keep scaling, and keep truth telling.
Absolutely. And just to spell that out, so it's prof for professor dot Sandra dot, and then your surname VANDERMERWE for anybody that is wondering. So that's where you can contact her at gmail.com. So once again, thank you so much, and best of luck with the book. And I'm sure you're going to have a lot of interest and a lot of people who are going to be, you know, I mean, the title alone is just, would definitely, you know, attract a lot of people. So once again, best of luck with the book, and we'll chat again soon, hopefully.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care then. Bye for now.